The cursed painting, a painting that steals the soul of anyone who looks at it. I should have left the crate unopened. That would have been the wiser version of the story. The one where curiosity learns restraint and lives long enough to tell dull, safe tales. But the afternoon light was leaning across the studio floor like a hand reaching for a switch. And the courier's footsteps had already faded down the stairs. The crate sat alone in the middle of the room anonymous wood, rough twine. 2 stamps from ports I have never visited and will never see. The label was written in a thin, persistent hand, the ink like old teeth, for restoration. Handle with care. Never meet her eyes. I laughed at the last line. The way restorers laugh at folklore to keep the day ordinary. Paintings stare for a living. It makes people uncomfortable. We tell ourselves there is no mystery the right solvent cannot soften. No history that does not yield to light and patience. I slit the twine anyway, because that is who I was then. Splinters pried loose along the grain. The lid lifted with a sigh, as if the crate had lungs, and the journey had been long. Beneath a layer of waxed paper lay the frame, wrapped like a body prepared by careful hands. The smell came first linseed and pine. An undertone of something sweet that wasn't quite rot and wasn't quite perfume. The scent you find in the throat of a church when no one is praying. I folded the paper back and felt the studio shrink, as if the walls had decided to lean in and have a look. The canvas was older than the label suggested, preposterously old for the condition. The ground layer was smooth, a pale bone color that had never seen daylight. The varnish above it held a faint amber that could have been centuries or days. Crackler ran like river maps across the surface, delicate, deliberate, as if a hand had drawn it with a needle. The frame itself was too modern, a mismatched suit on a body that remembered brocade and candlelight. But I have seen stranger marriages. My gloves clicked against the gilded corners. I set the painting on the easel and stepped back. She was seated 3/4 to the viewer. The pose too simple to be accidental. A chair I couldn't quite place straight back turned finial set at the wrong angle to the world. The way furniture is in dream rooms. A black dress, not morning black, but the black of water at night, absorbing light without apology. The skin was pale without powder, the kind of pallor that suggests the painter loved shadow more than flesh. Her hair, pulled away from the face, escaped into perfect disobediences near the temple. And the eyes no, not yet. I left the eyes for last, because eyes are where restorers lose the day. The background was neither landscape nor interior, merely a field of brown-green that never settled into wall or air. There was a pendant on her throat, a small oval on a chain so fine it might have been painted with a hair, pulled from the sitter's own head. The pendant was empty. The oval showed no miniature, no stone. The painter had painted emptiness and made it glint. I moved closer to check the varnish. Sometimes the old resins bloom, and people mistake the haze for spirits. I tilted the lamp and watched the light pass. The varnish didn't bloom. It breathed. I blinked, annoyed at my own hunger and the day's long shadow. I touched a cotton swab to the surface next to a fold of the dress. The solvent wetted the varnish and stayed there, a bright bead refusing to soak or slide, the way a teardrop hangs before a decision. When I lifted the swab, a tiny crescent of paler varnish followed, obedient, without revealing anything beneath. Whoever did the last coat knew what they wanted to protect. I told myself to log provenance, to read the file, to do the work in the right order. But the card on the crate was spare, private collection. Bequest pending. Evaluate, clean, stabilize. No dates. No titles. No artist. The back of the frame held to museum stickers. Both half peeled as if something had tugged them loose from within. The stretcher was not original, but the tacks were hand-cut, old enough to be suspicious or sincere. One never knows. I turned the painting right again and finally looked at what I had avoided. Her eyes were the wrong color. That is the best way I can tell it. Brown, yes, but the kind of brown that refuses to be named. Tea too strong, earth not dry. Amber before it forgives the fly. Something alive lived under that glaze. And it watched the watcher with a knowledge that had nothing to do with portraiture. The pupils were not quite round. They were not quite anything. I have always believed that paintings are mirrors with opinions. They show you your own gaze, sharpened and turned. This one watched with the patience of a saint who has run out of miracles. The mouth did not smile, did not frown. Merely held the suggestion of a shape the painter had decided we could not be trusted with. There was a tiny mark at the corner of her lip, a red that was not red. A touch so deft it made my own mouth become a wound in my face by comparison. The longer I stood there, the more the chair seemed to adjust under her, as if weight shifted. As if the sitter had moved and the paint had followed. I turned away to the cart, to the bottles, to anything with a label. And my pulse returned to its human rhythm. I began with the frame always safer. Flake, consolidate, gild, glaze. Work you can count. Work that makes a time lapse of your competence. The room filled with gold leaf and dust. And for a while I forgot that someone else breathed with me. When I looked up again, the pendant on her throat seemed to hold a shadow it had not held. A darker oval of emptiness that looked suspiciously like a reflection in glass. Except there was nothing there to reflect. I walked across the floor and saw myself approach the painting in the varnish's faint mirror. I was not in the pendant. The pendant was its own eye. The first sound came at dusk. Studios have 1,000 small noises, with settling, pipes complaining, light finding the places it cannot afford. This was not that. A soft, quick tap, as if a fingernail struck the glass from the inside, not asking to be let out, not asking anything, merely making itself known. Then another, a whispering scratch. The kind you hear when someone writes on a surface without ink and expects the world to understand. Anyway, I told myself a bug had found the frame and went to look. There was no bug. There was only a tiny smear by the lower right corner, a smear I had not made. A crescent of something darker than dirt. I pressed a cotton swab to it. The tip came away stained, not black, not brown, something warmer. I did not smell the swab. There are limits to professional curiosity. I brought it home that night because I tell myself there are things only careful hands can protect. And because I did not like the thought of the painting sleeping alone. The elevator stiffened when the crate rode up. The corridor to my flat felt narrower with the frame standing like a person. Where no one should stand. I set it on the chair at the foot of the bed and laughed at the dramatics of my own staging. The chair did not laugh back. In the dark, the square where the painting stood was darker than the room deserved. I kept the lamp on and turned toward the wall because I am not a character in someone else's story. And I am not easily frightened. I slept badly. Anyway, the dreams came as a debt I had forgotten I owed. Not nightmares, not at first. Rooms without corners. A hallway that folded where it ought not. A girl, no. A woman standing with her back to a window that had become a mirror. Combing hair that did not end. Hands laid flat on a table, one palm stained a dull red. As if she had pressed it to a page and found the page thirstier than skin. Every dream ended with the same gesture. I lifted a chain from a throat and saw that the pendant held not a miniature of a loved one, not a lock of hair, but a tiny oval mirror, dark as watered ink. I woke with a taste in my mouth like pennies and said the obvious lie aloud. It is only a painting. At the studio the next day, I did what all cowards call bravery. I cleaned a test patch an inch wide below the left shoulder, where the glaze pooled thicker. The cotton turned yellow with oxidized varnish. Beneath lay color that did not belong to any old master I know. A gray-blue, cool and cruel and modern. Sitting in a 19th century dress like a razor tucked inside lace. The edge of the shadow on her cheek sharpened. Her mouth, that not quite mouth, seemed to have learned something new while I wasn't looking. I turned to make notes and saw, in the steel tray's reflection, the faintest tilt of her head that had not happened in the world, only in the tray. When I faced her again, the head was as it had been. I made more notes than the event deserved. Provenance's gospel, until it isn't. I wrote letters. I called archivists. Two replied with curiosity and one with fear. An old catalog from a private sale in a century that had no business touching ours listed. Woman with pendant. Anonymous. School of. And the name was scratched out on the microfilm like a secret embarrassed to remain. A steward at a minor museum sent me a photograph of a similar sitter, with eyes repainted into a blank. We took it down, the steward wrote, after the staff complained of headaches and lost time. Lost time, the way a glove is lost, the way a ring is lost, meaning it never belonged to you properly. A conservator in a city I have never visited sent for words and nothing else. Do not face alone. I turned the painting to the wall for an hour after reading that, to prove that letters do not tell me what to do in my own rooms. The studio grew lighter without the gaze soaking it up. My shoulders let go of a height they had adopted, but the back of the canvas felt like the back of a person's head forced against a window. And I do not enjoy cruelty, not even to objects. I turned it around again. The eyes were patient with me, the way a knife is patient with a sheath. If you have never been stared at by oil and linen, you may not understand the next thing I say. There is a moment restorers know it when you fall into the surface. When the brushwork is a map and you have forgotten the sea. The line at the edge of the iris looked like a minuscule coast from the height of a god. The pores in the paint where the medium had leached were villages. The scumble of dust storm rolling everywhere at once. I stood there for a time that was both 5 minutes and a season. And when I stepped back, I had the uncanny feeling of having climbed out of a well. The room was air again. My hands shook as if they had been underwater too long. The lamp hummed in a register that people ignore. And the window had learned a geometry it had never had. I left the studio and walked until the pavement told me its small truths again. When I returned, the pendant oval glinted in a way it had not. An invitation turned into an instruction. I covered the pendant with a circle of inert tissue while I worked. The way you bandage a mole that should not see sun. Ridiculous. But sometimes we do ritual to appease the part of ourselves that knows about teeth and the night. With the pendant hidden, the painting seemed flimsy, like a story with its verb removed. The eyes, unembarrassed by my ruse, did not blink. I tested another patch above the right sleeve. The varnish yielded, the color refreshed, and underneath the yellow, I found the faintest ghost of a second hand where only one had been. As if the painter had changed their mind about the pose. Or the sitter had moved mid-stroke, and the first impulse refused to go entirely. Pentimenti, we call those palimpsests of intention. There were 3 stacked lightly, like someone had reached, withdrawn, reached again. The hand beneath was more open. The hand above was clenched. The final hand held nothing. I stood and became 3 people at once, the one reaching. The one withdrawing, the one who would, after both, hold emptiness as if it were an object. I brought a camera on the 3rd day. A sensible thing to do in an unreasonable week. I took a full-frame shot, then details the mouth, the pendant, the left eye, the right. In each close-up, the paint held the truth the camera demands. In the full frame, she looked a fraction to the left of where she had before. I printed nothing. I deleted nothing. I put the camera in the drawer and closed it softly because there's a way drawers close when you are trying. Not to wake a child, the first person to see it, other than me, was a courier who should have kept his eyes on the floor. He looked up as he signed for the rest of my chemicals, made a comment about the smell of turpentine, and then saw her. It is a terrible thing to witness recognition in a face where none should be. He frowned, mouth open a moment as if tasting a name, then smiled with the politeness we give to powerful strangers. He left without taking his copy of the receipt. That night, the doorbell rang at 2 in the morning, a ring that sounded like the memory of a ring. No one stood at the door. The next day, I found the courier's van parked on my street, engine off, keys in. The cab was empty. The city did not list him among the missing because you cannot list the unnamed. I knocked on 3 apartment doors that should have known him. No one answered who could say he existed. When I say the painting steals, I do not mean in the vulgar way. Pocket picked, jewelry gone, bank account murmuring 0. It steals slowly, the way winter takes the last color from a garden with phrases of frost and forgiveness. You wake and think your face in the mirror is tired. You wake again and believe it is ordinary to forget your own number for a moment. You begin to count the days not by their names, but by the shade the varnish takes at noon. Your friends call less because your voice has learned a distance that makes them repeat themselves. You eat, and the food tastes more and more like memory. You stand before linen and oil and feel the small tug at the back of your skull. That means something has called one of your rooms home. I told myself to send it back. People send back anything, shoes that do not fit, lovers who loved at the wrong hour. I wrote the letter in my head 3 times, and each time found my pen staring at a blank page, as if the paper had joined in the conspiracy of quiet. The crate lingered in the corner like a promise I didn't intend to keep. I wrapped the painting in tissue one morning and found my fingers had stuck to the paper. Not glue, not resin, not oil. The tissue had warmed, dampened, adhered as if it had remembered rain. When I pulled the paper free, the oval of the pendant was printed on it in a perfect negative, a dark circle that sucked light like a well. I folded the sheet and slid it under the door of the crate. The crate accepted this offering with a small sound the room pretended not to hear. There's a story people tell about a painter who signed his work with a trick of light. Stand here, and the signature appears. Stand there, and it vanishes. This is not that story. The painter did not sign this work. Or perhaps the signature is what remains when signatures are ashamed of themselves. I sat with the picture all afternoon. The kind of sitting you do when a person you love is ill and there is nothing left to do but play at being useful. The light sank to that tired angle that makes dust proud. The room turned the color of old photographs. And in the pendant I saw, faint and far, a room I knew, a room with an easel, with an empty chair. A room with a person standing nearly where I stood, except the person was a fraction wrong. As if someone had torn a silhouette from paper and slid it too close to the outline it came from. I stepped to the side, and the tiny darkness in the pendant stepped too. With a politeness that made my throat go dry, I covered the oval with my thumb and felt the faintest impression of warmth through glass. That should have been cold dot after that. I stopped sleeping properly. Night became a lake I walked into because day gave me no shore. When I did sleep, the dreams lost their patience and turned to instruction. I stood in rooms with too many doors. I chose none. The doors sighed and swung inward on their own. Inside each door was not a room, but a canvas, stretched and waiting. The ground lay wet as if it had been wept on. A brush waited where a doorknob would be, its bristles stained a color that is not in any box. I woke with my fingers bent as if around a handle, and the bed smelled faintly of linseed. I tested the painting with fluorescence, with raking light, with anything that reveals where a hand has lied. Beneath the smooth, honest skin of color, beneath the confident glaze, there lay another image. And another below that, pentimenti not of pose, but of presence. A face that was not the face above. Then a different one beneath cheekbones that did not belong to this woman. Eyelids with another person's fold, lips with a habit this mouth had never learned. Layers of women, layers of time. Each erased not with the usual cruelty of a scraper, but with a tenderness. That made the erasure worse. It is one thing to be removed by force. It is another to be replaced with love. The old woman in the hall outside my studio asks for cigarettes I do not have. She wears a cardigan with buttons that seem arranged in a cone. She asked once what I was working on, and I told her only a portrait. She nodded, as if that word explained the weight in my eyes. My sister sat for a portrait once, she said. The painter put sugar in the tea, and the flies loved us all afternoon. Then she tilted her head to the angle of a listening dog. Don't look if she looks back. I asked her who told her that. She frowned, and for a moment her face was a blank canvas I had not ordered. Who told me what? She said, and walked away, leaving the scent of old wool and rain. There is a moment at which fear becomes practice. I began to perform a small ritual before I faced the painting, taped the pendant with tissue, set the lamp at a precise angle, place a small mirror behind me so that what looked at me would see itself looking. I told myself this was method, not magic. I worked on the dress. I worked on the chair. I worked on the background that was not a background. I named colors that had no names because names are handles, and I needed to carry the day. I left the face for last. It grew more alive from my neglect. The first time I saw the face change in the world, and not in the tray. I had been awake for 30 hours. We are poor witnesses at the edge of sleep. The corner of the mouth tugged. The shadow along the jaw softened. The left eye widened by a width too small to measure with anything but dread. I stepped backward with the grace of a person meeting the edge of a stair in the dark. The painting leaned forward to be kind. That is what I tell myself. It leaned to steady me. My throat found a noise it had never learned to make. And the room replied with the soft tap-tap from behind glass. The fingernail announcement that says, I am here, and I know you know me. The letter arrived on a day I had finally left the studio and walked to the river. The envelope bore no stamp, no address, only my name written in the same thin, persistent hand that had labeled the crate. Inside was a single sheet, keep the varnish. Never remove the last layer, no signature. The paper smelled faintly of the same sweet rot as the painting, which means there is no paper. There is only a thin skin of something that remembers being sap. I held the letter with gloved fingers until the glove stuck in that polite way old varnish does. I folded it and slid it into a book of poems I have not opened since. The next thing I say will sound like an admission in a church with poor light. I looked into her eyes to long. I say to long as if there is a proper amount to look and a line it crosses into sin. I do not know the measure. I know only that I found my gaze held the way a moth finds the lamp. Inside her irises, the brown that is not brown gathered into a darker figure. A small shape that could have been a pupil and could have been a tunnel. I lean forward because bodies lean toward gravity. The tunnel is where a face goes when it is finished with faces. The longer I looked, the more the room forgot me. The longer I looked, the less my own hands belonged to the ends of my arms. The longer I looked, the more I understood that the painter did not paint a woman, but a door. How do you restore a door that opens inward on a country no one should visit? You do not. You dust the threshold and call it conservation. You leave the hinges and tell yourself that squeaks are character. You write reports because reports are armor. I wrote one that said nothing and mailed it to no one. Then I stood in front of the painting at night when the building was empty and let the darkness fill the corners where the world frays. I spoke aloud the names of pigments to remind myself of science. Yellow ochre, burnt umber, lamp black. The painting did not care. It has never cared for what we call things. It knows only hunger and the elegance of a patience that wins. People will ask later why I didn't cover it, why I didn't turn it to the wall forever, why I didn't send it back to the mouth it came from. People say send back when they mean give to another throat. I kept it because it kept me. The exchange was honest. I lost hours and days, and the name of the courier, and the name of a woman who once loved me, from a street away. I lost my own reflection in the bathroom mirror for a weekend. It returned with a slightly different posture. I lost the fear that keeps us upright. I gained the knowledge of a small oval of glass that looks like a pendant and behaves like a well. And I gained a story I am still telling while I still have a mouth to tell it with. The last day I worked on her, I did nothing that would satisfy an invoice. I stood and breathed and allowed the small taps from within to teach me their rhythm. The taps are not random. They are a code for telling when the viewer will look away. The painter knew this. They must have learned it by years of waiting in rooms for sitters who would not hold still. Tap, blink. Tap, tap, swallow. Tap, 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 step back. You can keep someone a long time if you count like that. I counted until my own blinking obeyed. I counted until the room and the inside of the varnish agreed on terms. I counted until the pendant's oval filled with a darkness that was not absence, but attention. If you ask me now what is inside the painting, I will answer you with a patient lie, nothing that you do not bring. That is true the way a mirror is true. It will show you your face. Until you notice the window behind it. In the small oval, I have seen rooms that hold chairs that match mine. I have seen frames that hold paintings that hold frames. I have seen the faint outline of a person seated a fraction wrong. And I have seen that outline stand when I stood. Turn when I turned, bring its hand to its throat when I lifted mine to cover the pendant. Once I saw the curve of a mouth within the oval, not hers, not mine. A third mouth learning the shape of a word I do not know. It was very small, and the size did not make it less terrifying. I sent one photograph to the steward who had written lost time. I attached no message. The file bounced back with an error that suggested the address had never existed. 2 days later, a parcel arrived at my door with no return, containing a book of listed works from a museum that burned 20 years ago. A page had been marked with a ribbon the color of dried roses. The description there matched my painting except for the title, The Welcome. I laughed aloud. Actual laughter, the sound of a person forgetting the temperature of a room. Even now I can taste the shape of that word. Welcome. It is the most polite kind of trap. If you ask me if you are still listening, if my voice has not thinned to the point where you hear breath and call it silence. What happened after I finished pretending to work? I will tell you the part you already know. I sat down in the chair at the foot of the easel because standing felt like an argument. I could not win. I removed the tissue from the pendant because I am not a believer in bandages that insult anatomy. I raised the lamp because light is the oldest superstition, and we all enjoy our old gods. I looked. She looked. The room exhaled the way rooms do when weather changes. I felt the soft tap from within the glass ones twice. 3 times, and then a pause that was exactly long enough to allow a tear to gather and not fall. I do not remember the next R in words. Bodies have other alphabets. The floor learned my knees. The chair learned my hands. The air learned my mouth and filled it with a taste like coin and rain. The pendant learned my name and simplified it to a shape I recognized as mine before I had a name. The eyes in the portrait learned a small, satisfied surprise. When the art passed and the day had the decency to admit it, the studio was ordinary again. There was dust. There was the lamp. There was a cotton swab on the tray that had dried to a polite stiffness. And there was the painting, which looked a fraction more finished than a picture without a painter has any right to look. You will ask where I am, as if location is the cure stories give to fear. I am here, in a chair you cannot see, looking at a woman you will call beautiful until you remember how to be careful. I am here, in a small oval of glass that remembers everything it has ever reflected. I am here, in the varnish bloom that never was. I am here, in the rhythm of 3 taps and a pause. I am here in the eyes, in the pupils that are not quite round, in the brown that refuses to be named. And I am there with you when you imagine the picture while I speak. Because that is how paintings travel, not in crates, not in vans, but in the minds of people who tell themselves they are immune to hunger because they have eaten today. If you ever find yourself with a crate on the middle of a studio floor and a courier's footsteps fading down the stairs. If the label has a hand like thin teeth and the warning reads like a dare. If the wood smells like a room that was once a church, set down the knife. Leave the twine where it is. Walk away. You will not. You will open it because the lid has lungs and you have a history with air. You will unwrap the paper the way a child unwraps the last gift on a day that should have ended already. You will see black dress, pale skin, pendant, chair, background that is not background. And you will tell yourself 100 small truths that will make one large lie. I am the one looking, and then you will meet her eyes. I am saying goodbye with the practice of a person who has said it too often. The painting does not require farewells. It keeps what it keeps. But voices love goodbye. It gives us shade. If I have been slow, it is because slowness is the only courtesy left to me. If I have been careful, it is because carefulness is the last craft I own. If you have been listening with the lamp on and the room a fraction smaller than it was when you began, if you have noticed that your mirror has taken a heartbeat to agree with you, if you have reached for your throat without intending to, then I have done what the painting wants and the story wants. And what hunger wants most of all, I have brought your face close to the glass. Now the taps will begin, soft as etiquette. Once, twice, 3 times, and then a pause. Do not lean forward. Do not test the varnish with a cotton swab. Do not remove the tissue from the oval you will tell yourself is only a pendulum of light. Walk away from the easel. Leave the chair where it is. Let the painting sleep with its eyes open. If you cannot, if you must look, if the room insists and your mouth tastes like coin and rain, then at least remember the craft that has carried us so far. Do not meet her gaze. While you are breathing, breathe out first. Give away the last air. Then look. Perhaps there is a mercy in that, perhaps none. I am not a priest, and this is not a prayer. It is only a record the sort a diary makes when ink is untrustworthy, and the hand is not entirely one's own. And if tomorrow you find you cannot recall the name of a courier, or the color of a street you have walked for years, if a woman you loved feels a room farther away than she was yesterday, if the mirror hesitates, if the lamp hums in a key you do not recognize, If a frame in an old photograph shows a chair where someone should be seated and no one is, forgive yourself! Paintings steal slowly, but they do not lie. The soul they take is not a single thing, but a distance measured between two glances. I have given mine in inches, and it has gone. I am here, and I am inside, and I am looking, and I am looked at, and I am not finished, and the painter is still working, and the varnish is still warm, and the pendant is very dark, and very small, and very patient. Do not meet her eyes. Never meet her eyes. Never meet her eyes.